Today I'm going to be talking to you about forced parental absence and child well-being. And what I will be doing is making an argument that is rooted in the demographic realities of mass incarceration and deportation, that I hope calls attention to promising pathways for future research and family studies, and inspires family demographers and researchers to think more deeply about what we mean when we talk about contemporary forms of parental absence. To start with some background, when I refer to forced parental absence, I mean the state-driven removal of a parent from a family or household unit. In family studies more broadly, this topic has been largely neglected. When thinking about the relationship of the family to the state and consequences for children, the literature has been dominated by a focus on explicit forms of family policy, those policies that are directly designed to intervene in family life and structures such as child protection, parental leave, and child care. When thinking about parental absence, family scholarship has been largely dominated by a focus on non-coercive and internal mechanisms: divorce, legal separation, parental death. But family structure, particularly in the United States, has become increasingly dependent on the state in implicit and indirect ways. Incarceration has increased nearly fivefold in the last 50 years, making the US the world leader in incarceration per capita. A majority of state prisoners, 52%, and federal prisoners, 63%, are parents to minor children, which means between 5 and 8 million children experience parental incarceration at some point in their childhood. We've seen similar growth in rates of deportation in the past 30 years, albeit on a smaller scale. And an estimated 1 in 4 deportees is a parent of a US citizen. This means 5.1 million children are at risk of parental deportation in the United States. Now, this demographic reality has garnered attention from incarceration and migration scholars, but these bodies of research have remained siloed from each other and from family studies literature more broadly. Despite their relative isolated development, similar claims have emerged in both literatures that these mechanisms may be particularly punitive for children or even represent a form of state or legal violence against families. So I thought to examine these claims and to get a better understanding of how these mechanisms fit into broader parental absence conversations, bridging incarceration and deportation literatures to address 2 questions. First, I reviewed the theoretical arguments, really to see if there is something of value to be added by looking at the mechanisms collectively. Second, I reviewed the empirical work to really get at the claim in question. Do outcomes for children vary by type of absence? So what I found were a variety of theoretical parallels. First, the mechanisms are similarly unevenly distributed, disproportionately affecting families of color and removing men from households, producing concern over the unique labor market and financial support challenges that these populations may face. This could be compounded by the involuntary nature of these mechanisms, which doesn't allow for choice in determining the most financially stable structure for children, as some other absences may allow. Additionally, the punitive nature of these mechanisms are distinctly stigmatized relative to non-state-driven absences, with a body of research emerging illustrating the discrimination that previously incarcerated and deported people face, and the ways that that discrimination can be passed through familial association. Some scholars have argued that the ambiguity associated with these absences may produce distinct challenges as families work to keep a physically absent parent emotionally present, which may be compounded because others argue that these relationships are oftentimes more tenuous than absences such as divorce or legal separation, citing the lower rates of physical contact documented among incarcerated and deported parents and families, which may inhibit a parental ability to meet the complex social and emotional needs of children. Finally, both incarceration and migration scholars point out the association of these state-driven mechanisms with trauma, citing increased risks of exposure to distressing events, such as witnessing an arrest or detainment of a parent. Additionally, research has shown higher risk for other forms of compounding trauma among the affected populations. For example, children with incarcerated parents have been found to be exposed to 5 times as many adverse childhood experiences as those without incarcerated parents. What has emerged in the review was a variety of similarities that could suggest there may be something to learn about absences that are distinctly state or forced. Turning to empirical evidence, I reviewed what research has looked both at outcomes for children and utilized a comparison group of children that experienced some other form of parental absence, really getting at the question of where this fits in and how this compares to other forms of parental absence. Only 7 studies were identified as having taken this comparative approach, 6 of which were conducted in the last 15 years, which mirrors increased interest on this topic more broadly. 6 of these studies were drawn from incarceration literature, highlighting a particular gap in the migration research. 5 yielded limited but suggested evidence that the effects on children vary by type of absence. 4 found statistically significant differences among children with incarcerated parents, including higher rates of internalizing and antisocial behavior, delinquency, and attention disorders relative to other selected forms of parental absence. Additionally, there was a study that found qualitative differences in the types of anxiety and insecurities experienced by children with deported parents versus those with parents who migrated voluntarily. Beyond these suggestive findings, what is even more clear is that there is a stark dearth of research dedicated to this question, despite growing attention to this topic in the past 15 years. My goal in this exercise is to call attention to some promising pathways for future research. My theoretical review reveals an opportunity for researchers to bridge these 2 literatures to better understand the structural conditions of state-driven absences that may produce distinct child outcomes. My empirical review reveals an opportunity to comparatively evaluate the differential effects of these mechanisms so that we can better understand how they fit into this broader picture and conversation. More than anything, this work highlights the opportunity for family scholars to recognize the demographic reality of incarceration and deportation, and more meaningfully incorporate these mechanisms into contemporary conversations around parental absence and family disruption. I believe this is one crucial part of a broader movement to think more deeply about implicit family policy. And I hope it inspires more conversations around the indirect and implicit ways that family life and structure is being shaped by the state. Thank you so much for joining me today.